Hey friends, welcome to an impromptu episode of Area 312 Rock and Metal Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Kent, along with my co-host.
Rex.
And friends, we have one of our buddies today, guest co-host with us, Jeff McCormick from Mega Just Rock Hard Vinyl and Heaven's Metal Online Magazine. Welcome back, Jeff.
Woohoo! Good to be here.
I see your Worldview shirt, Jeff. Did you pre-order the new album?
This is from the previous album
Right.
when they did it on vinyl. It was a package deal. I did pre-order the new album. I did not get the shirt. I did see them at Immortal Fest. I did not buy the shirt there, even though I should have. But yes, anyway, great shirt.
I remember seeing like three pretty sleek styles of Worldview shirts, if I'm
They
not
have
mistaken.
they had quite a few of them that were kind of cool and with like cyber characters and
Mhm.
I like a wolf on. I don't know. They looked really cool. But I just, had already spent a lot of money, so I didn't buy it.
I have pre-ordered the new album. I'm trying to think. Have they released a single? I might have heard a single. I can't remember if I've heard.
Well, the song from the song Invincible, which is on this new album, was a song that they issued like a couple years ago.
Mhm.
And then the album just never happened. And so that's on the album, which I think that's the name of the album too. So that is a song that has been in existence for a couple years now. But I haven't seen anything else, but I might have missed it. I don't know if
Well, I think they did that Dio cover song too, Jeff, and I know that's going to be on the album too. So that'll be cool too. So yeah, those are the only two singles I think they've released.
Rex and I often get involved in conversations and run the gamut about things. And um, let me ask you guys. Number one, Jeff, Rex, do you feel that the state of, I know things aren't what they used to be as they were during the first wave golden days of Christian rock and metal in the 80s, okay? What I'm calling the 80s when it really, and mostly on the Christian metal side of things, when here came Messiah Prophet and Saint, and Blood Good, Striper, Daniel Band, in no particular order, of course. Do you feel that the current state or our community, shall we say, of Christian rock and metal, those who appreciate the genre, do you feel that's it's in a healthy state today as far as output and progress or what have you?
Rex says stay
Well,
silent.
I was just going to let you go first, Jeff, because you're our guest, but I would say yes. In the last 5 to 7 years, I mean, you've got bands who are putting out, albums that kind of we thought we'd never see, albums from. And I mean, the release schedule is very healthy. I mean, there's something, several titles every month coming out, and they're in the early 2000s through the teens there. That wasn't the case. I feel there's been a real huge resurgence in that whole genre, especially from the original bands and that. So I say yes, that I feel, the genre's in a really good state of at least releasing new music.
And I would agree with that. I mean, in the 90s, I think a lot of bands were put out of business, and I think a lot of those bands that we grew up loving have now been resurrected and they're putting out stellar material. We've seen it with so many bands. Bands that are long gone, all of a sudden, 30 years later, are coming back and they're putting out some great material. On the other hand, there's so many bands out there that, back in the 80s, there wasn't that many bands to follow, and we loved them and we listened to them extensively. Now there's so many, it's like you listen to an album once or twice and you put it away and you get the next album. It can be overwhelming to a degree. The other thing that I think, sadly, that we see a lot of is nowadays everybody has their own studio. Everybody can record on a laptop. Everybody can do their own thing in their own bedroom and release it. You don't require record labels. They self-produce it. They're their own engineer. And unfortunately, I think we're also seeing a flood of subpar, mediocre releases in the name of Christian music, which I think is somewhat detrimental. We had a lot of that back in the day as demo tapes, but
Mhm.
those never saw the light of day as, to the major market. when you got an album out, it was one that had sold their soul to a record label who probably didn't get paid for it, but they at least had a bit of money and maybe a producer behind them. And so the stuff was on a decent par. But I think nowadays there's just so much stuff, and then you're like, some of the stuff is not as, shouldn't have been released. But then there is some stuff that's like we were talking worldview
Mhm.
and Reign of Glory and some of these bands that are, in my opinion, just top notch,
Mhm.
just as good, if not better than the stuff we had before. So there's a lot of it out there. When it comes to the kind of music we love, we tend to do with the melodic metal. There's a lot of great stuff, but I think so much of it in the Christian market nowadays is overwhelmingly extreme metal. There are probably 20 times more extreme metal bands. I hear about them all the time, especially on the Heavens Metal crew. I'm like, who is this band you're talking about? There's every day there's a new band name. Are they a Christian band? Who are they? I don't know who they are. There's like so many of them, but I guess those of us in our age group, it's easy to get stuck in the rut and say, I'm only listening to the classics. And it is
Right.
great to see so much, not only great new music, but the reissue of a lot of that stuff. We're seeing a lot of great reissues. So, I'm hoping that, the people are enjoying it that are buying it, other than just me and 5 or 10 other people that buy all these releases. So,
I'm trying my best to branch out a little bit because I'm one of these, I don't mean to be stuck in old school mode. I mean,
right.
but when grunge hit, I had a disconnect with music. I didn't understand it because I was still in the, if you all will forgive me for using this as an example, but Poison had the song Don't Need Nothing But a Good Time. And my point is, in the 80s, it was kind of like a party atmosphere. I don't mean that in a bad term. It's just, hey, we're having a good time and we're celebrating. And Kingdom of Rock by Guardian, that was a good time song, and Welcome to the Rock and uh, Worldview. I did pre-order. I have their first album. I pre-ordered the second. Human Code, I purchased it. Reign of Glory, oh goodness. I'm trying my best to branch out, into some of these newer bands. Let me ask you guys, with Reign of Glory though, I know it's a new band, but it was comprised of some classic members, doing it right and bringing back with modern production that wonderful. That's how we did it back in the 80s, and Nick Layton, man, laying it down, and Robin Kyle, and now Mark Bowles, and beautiful album, Scattershot. It's a great album. Let me ask you guys, I want to ask this question. Something you said, Jeff, prompted me. You were talking about the myriad of bands out, and growth is good. Growth is always good. It means it's not stagnant, but you were talking about quality. Here's a questionable topic. Um, I don't mean this disparaging, and there's no right or wrong. These are just opinions. Let's say that you had a myriad of bands out there, of newer bands, kind of doing the old do-it-yourself factor, and they all use the same lead singer. Do you feel that that could potentially be hurtful to the bands? Could it run the risk? What I mean is, could it run the risk of oversaturation of a
Oversaturation.
voice?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, yes. And I mean, rather than just going with strictly that, I know that's a topic. But just in general, I think, and here's the thing, and I'm not, I wasn't meaning that disparagingly either, but maybe the stuff that I'm hearing that I'm calling subpar, maybe is the best, somebody's favorite album. It could be me. I'm an old school, old fart. Maybe it's just not as palatable to my ears.
Right.
Maybe I've set my mental bar too high. So I'm not, these mass amount of bands that are coming out maybe are awesome to other people.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to keep releasing them, I mean, but I hear some of this stuff and I'm thinking musically it sounds like it was recorded in somebody's garage. The drums sound like everything's it's just do it yourself. um and then it doesn't matter whose vocals you lay on top of it, that doesn't always make a difference. But then I find like some bands I listen to the lyrics, I'm like they just I don't know who's in charge of all of that. I know sometimes people go in the studio and the producer is like, no, this stinks, and they make bands. They push the band and push the band and push the band until something's right. And I don't think we have that all the time. And so you get this stuff out there, and I'm listening to some of these bands. I'm like, these lyrics, not only do they not flow, they just sound like somebody's trying to tell a story, and they don't rhyme, they don't flow, they're just clunky. And I'm just like, and then it makes me wonder, why did somebody agree to release this? And I hate to think that, but so I'm a little more leery. I used to buy anything and everything with the Christian mark on it as a support of not only the label but any of these bands. But then I just started being more particular because I'm like, I can't listen to this. It's just, in my opinion, not. And sometimes I feel like, are we embarrassing? There was a back in the Heaven's Metal days, there was a lot of stuff about art. Kipper Crab used to have a whole series in the Heaven's Metal magazine on the Christian art,
Mm-hmm.
the art of music. And I think as a Christian, because we're already facing so many struggles with Christian rock. I mean, it's a joke. It's 5 years, it's 10 years behind. I think we are forced to try to be a step above our counterparts that are in the world, the mainstream. And I think putting out stuff that is not can be kind of, maybe it's an embarrassment on the, a blemish on the Christian scene. I don't know. Again, not trying to be disparaged, but it's just kind of like it should be everything we should be pushing for, higher quality. And I just find that some stuff's getting put out. And it's one thing if a band's releasing it. It's another thing if some, labels are releasing it. It's just kind of like who's who's in the studio saying, yeah, that sounds great. Let's put that out. It just makes me wonder sometimes if
Well,
the do-it-yourself attitude is causing problems.
and Jeff, too, just good or bad, come on, the lead vocalist is always what people are going to, relate to or hear first. And so, if you got a lead vocalist doing 10 different projects, there's no identity for any of those 10 bands.
Yeah, but
I
that never
mean,
happens. Come on, Rex. That never happens.
um, but I mean, I'm just saying, like, if you do that, you're already, kind of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit as that band because, you want your own identity or you want your own sound or whatever. And if you're using someone who's on, all those other projects, you're already kind of hampering yourself, if you ask me, a little bit, on that. So that's another reason I wouldn't do that if I was a band, unless it was my absolute last resort.
And it's interesting because there's so many great singers out there. It makes you wonder why some do more than others. Um, I mean, it doesn't take much nowadays. They don't have to fly to the studio or whatever. It's all done online. So it's like, why are there not more? And there can be. I mean, like we saw in Tourniquet, every song on the last couple of Tourniquet albums had different singers, and none of them were like in the studio with Ted. They were from all over the world. And so you can get any singer you want. I don't know who would agree or disagree to do it, but um, I mean, you find a stellar singer. I mean, would Michael Sweet be open to singing on my album if I recorded something? Or, he's a big name, if I send him money, so it just seems like if you're going to hire somebody, is there who do you go for? It seems like in some cases there are some that are oversaturated. It feels like there's appearing on too many records. So it can be a bit much. And yeah, so then it becomes, is it a band or is it a project or is it a band that hired a singer? Is he in the band? Could the band tour? Is the band going to tour? Is there going to be a project? Is he in the band or is it just his project or is it the band's project? Yeah, it's just music for the sake of music.
Well, and Jeff, you just touched on a point there. I think, we talked about oversaturation, and I think that's what we got. We've got a lot of projects now versus like true bands. And I know to go out and tour and all that, that's just probably for most bands not financially feasible and whatnot. But I think which I guess it's okay, but you're seeing a lot of projects too. And I think that's just flooded the market too.
And
And
you do find some of that on the secular side. On the mainstream side,
Right,
there are
right,
people. I mean,
right.
I talk about on my channel all the time. I'm a huge like Mike Portnoy fan,
Yep.
and he is probably in 10 different bands as a drummer.
Mhm.
But they do tour. A lot of them do tour. So, but that, they're mainstream bands. So there
Mhm.
are people that seem to stretch themselves thin. But yeah, it is different in the Christian market because I don't think there's a lot of that touring going on. So these guys can say, yeah, I'll do vocals on your album, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
There's no connection beyond that. Um, so I would just think that if I was going to do my vocals on an album, if I could sing, shouldn't I be more, well, whatever. I'm not. Would I not be particular? I want to hear what I'm going to sing to, and I'm going to agree or disagree with the quality and say, I don't want to be involved with that. So I don't know how much of that's going on, how many projects get turned down. I just know that, some things that I hear that are released, I'm just like, it doesn't appeal to me. Maybe it appeals to somebody else. I just feel like it sounds like it's a little just more mediocre in some cases. And not naming any particular project, but there's just so many out there that's why I started being a little more picky and choosy rather than, you know, buying
well,
everything.
and I'm not making excuses, but guys, a couple thoughts that popped into my head as the discussion table was going around was back in the 80s during that first wave. I remember, and I will mention a band, Tempest. I had both of their albums that were released back then, and of course, the first one, I could hear the merit in the songs. Maybe some maybe a little more than others, but the production of that first album was not good. Um, I still hold that in high regard. Man, what I wouldn't do to have that remastered from Rob Caldwell or Jeremy Brown or somebody.
I'd like to see it remixed and remastered. That would be,
You
get the
know,
original tapes and remix it and clean
yeah.
it up.
There were some other, I'll just use that one example, and I mean that in a good way because I love that album. I
I
love both
love that album
Tempest
too.
albums. Now, back then, there wasn't as much to choose from. So, Jeff, in a way, are you saying that it's okay to we can afford to be a little bit more choosy now? I mean,
I think, yeah, I mean, because back in the day, there wasn't much out there. And if it was on a label, it had to go through a certain process. Now, admittedly, there were a lot of subpar things that came out in some people's mind. I love that Tempest album.
yes,
When it came out, and I'll say the same thing about Striking. And good thing Kevin's not here because he poo-poos that album. But what they were is what they were, and I
I
love
love
them.
striking.
Yeah, because that's first Striking and that first Tempest. I was so impressed with that first Tempest album. Not only was it on my answering machine, when you would call my house, it would go "Rock on with Jesus," and I edited that out with cassettes back in the day where you're starting and
Yeah.
stopping and splicing. I looked them up and I called their house and I talked to this 17-year-old punk named JR, um, who had, I mentioned this on his Facebook the other day because he was talking about how it's the anniversary of his father's passing. When I called him, his father had just passed away like within a couple weeks.
Mm.
So I was here. I wasn't 19, 20, and he's 17 and got an album out. But we talked and we hit it off, and we've talked many a times over the year. He called me. I think we talked when they were in the studio doing the second album. They were living in the studio and writing the songs in the studio because they didn't have the songs. Anyway, I loved that album, and to me, it's very nostalgic. I would crank it on today and put it on and crank it on. But yeah, okay, looking back, was it on par with some of the other albums that were out there? Maybe not. That whole scandal, if you even know the story behind how Tempest got signed, um,
Yes, right. Thought it was a different Tempest.
thought
Yeah.
it was another Tempest. And so I think the label, when they realized their issue, maybe they didn't put any money behind it. Maybe their songs were just, I don't know if they were recorded in the studio, if the band had recorded them and the label just put them out. I don't recall the whole story there, um, but yeah, nowadays it just seems like there's so I don't know. It was the same back then, but back then it was all cassette tapes being put out, and they weren't investing a lot of money in it. So I don't know. We probably had a lot back then that we were more selective of, but there wasn't as much much of it released by labels that we could get our hands on easily. Whereas nowadays it's very easy to get a CD mass produced and an album mass produced and anyway.
Let me ask you this then, guys, with regard to, we'll just call it the word quality in a different sense here. You remember the Elefante brothers, the Pachyderm Records label? Who could forget, right? It was the stamp of quality, right? The
Right.
rock stomps here. You remember kind of the slogan that was always inside it. I don't remember the whole of it, but it said something to the effect of um, working through and to the church. You remember that? There was a little saying inside, and the Elefantes were talking about working to and through the church.
Okay.
And it was a form of accountability in a way. Do you feel that is important? Like in this realm, Jeff, of self-production, do you think that accountability for artists who are espousing a Christian message, and Rex, you too, do you all feel that kind of that accountability factor is important, where Christian brothers are, kind of, hey, this is good, or maybe this is a little sketchy or subpar. I mean, what do y'all think?
Well, if you're talking strictly lyric, I mean, from a musical standpoint, I think there should be more ears on it because back in the day, you had producers and people who would say, "No, this stinks." I don't think we have that. It's all self-produced. I think they should let more people listen to it and say, "What do you think?" Well, maybe have another set of ears to listen to it. Lyrically, I'm not sure how easy that would be. I mean, because the church has so many teachings on
Yeah,
so many diverse teachings, divergent teachings. Because yeah, I almost wanted to start a column because I was pretty, in my opinion, theologically astute back in the day. Big reader of ancient church stuff, the Puritans, the people, the reformers, people who were serious theology. That a lot of Christian music came off as being kind of like fluff to me, and I thought maybe I should start a column back when I was writing analyzing and discussing, debating the lyrical content of some of these bands. But I'm like, that's just too much division. It's just your cause and thing. But yeah, I mean, and a lot back in the day, it was like, well, that band didn't mention Jesus. They must not be a Christian band. There was all kinds of judgment. We had that
right.
issue. Nowadays, I look at it and I'm like, now if they mention Jesus, I almost feel like sometimes it comes off kind of cheesy, but it depends. So yeah, at least bands have in many ways you learn to not just sing songs about Jesus as the rock. They've got songs that have depth. You got some of these bands that are some of those borderline Christian bands. Are they a Christian band? There's Christians in a band, blah, blah, blah. Some of the most coolest metaphors and biblical imagery, bands like Galactic Cowboys.
Hmm.
I see it all over the place. As a Christian, I'm like, and King's X, the early King's X,
Yeah.
it's layered with
Hmm.
metaphorical Christian stuff.
Illusion, yeah.
Illusion. I love that stuff
Me too.
rather than just you're coming out with it nowadays. So there is some of that in the art form. Um, and that's why sometimes when I hear some of these newer bands that are singing, it sounds to me like they came out of the 80s with the 80s record lyrical style where it's not only in your face, but it just doesn't flow. They're trying to cram too many words into a sentence to tell the story like right out of the Bible. And it's just like, you need to work on your songwriting. Um, so yeah, I think somebody should go back and before they release it and listen to it and say, you could probably phrase that better, chop out some, and maybe not say that word or. But I don't know. Yeah, when it comes to judging the actual lyrical content, I mean, you're going to get 10 different opinions when you let two people listen to
Sure.
it.
Well, and I like it. I know Petra's the one that comes to mind, and it's just kind of nice when you can kind of see what they're basing their lyrics or a song on, And I know some other bands for their songs include, verses of scripture.
A
That
scripture
just
reference
kind
or
of
something. Yeah.
helps you kind of figure out where they're coming from. And I know it's artistic, and so there's, can be all kinds of interpretations. So it's just kind of nice when you kind of get you feel of a biblical, basis or foundation for the lyrics of the song. And they don't have to be quoting scripture per se in the lyrics, but if you can kind of get an idea of the concept of what they're, trying to say. I always appreciated that about the lyrics from
And that's
Petra,
why
that it
I
had
think that's,
verses in it.
yeah, I think that's, and over the years, I think I've matured to a degree in the fact that I used to be one of those ones where they don't talk about Jesus on the album. I'm like, I just don't like that as much. But I do now appreciate the allusions, the metaphors, the art side of things,
Mhm.
because you think about it, and it's like, who are these guys singing to? They shouldn't be. Now, of course, back in the day, we were looking for the alternative. We wanted to throw away our secular music and listen to some. So we're the Christian audience. So yeah, you're singing to the choir. The band's not necessarily wanted to sing to the choir. They weren't, that's not their goal. They weren't there to provide music for Christians. And so that's why we could be judgmental about it sometimes, because it's like they're not talking to me. Um, so I do appreciate that more nowadays, where I can listen to music just with the idea that I know the person that's writing it is writing from a spiritual bent without being overtly Christian. I'm at least know that I'm listening to, call it, clean music, or because I know at least that I'm going to be digesting something that is uh, not going to be, offensive. So I'm not on the alert for what are they saying? Are they talking about Jesus in every song type thing? So I've kind of grown to appreciate that more. And it used to be, I got to the point where even when I'm listening to secular music, I'm like, wow, why? And I've found albums on the secular realm that have biblical allusions. And nowadays you get on Facebook, you're like, what did you mean by that? Why did you write that? Um, and it's, you find that these people have a spiritual background, and
Yes.
on that particular song they were singing Christian lyrics.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I appreciate that. It's like it comes through. And there's still a lot of bands out there, and you wonder, are they a Christian band? They have so many illusions, but they don't say they are. So there's some,
Yeah.
it's kind of neat nowadays. I feel like there's, that freedom, that we have, where we're not, at least in my case, where I'm not as judgmental as I was back in the 80s. So
Maybe we can save that for another topic, Jeff, because I would love to get into some bands or albums or songs um, that you would not think that this band would have these meaningful illusions about things, not illusions, friends, but illusions, and there's some depth and you wouldn't expect it, but I'd love to kind of do a deep dive with you guys and maybe another friend or two on that.
yeah, we could pick some like mainstream bands with surprising lyrics. That would,
Yes.
something like that. There was one, I won't mention the name because if this may come up on that topic, but so I'm also not only, I'm a big reader. I guess I got a couple books, you can tell. But I also read what would be considered, I dabble in some of the extra biblical stuff. And what I mean by that is like pseudepigraphal,
Hmm.
not New Testament, uh, uh,
Like
weird.
Maccabees and all that.
Well, that's all, that's somewhat canon in some people's Bibles. But no,
Right.
I'm talking like a Book of Enoch, the
Yeah.
Book of Moses, there's a lot of books that were not put in the canon, but they still exist.
Bell and the
Uh,
Dragon.
that's Daniel's weird. Anyway, stuff like that. The stuff that has been kind of forgotten. So I've done lectures on the Book of Enoch and the influences that it had on New Testament scripture stuff. But so the Book of Enoch has stories about the Genesis 6 thing, and it talks about giants and stuff. And there's a band out there, and I'm like, the lyrics were right out of to somebody, in my opinion, to somebody who had this background, I'm like, this guy has read the Book of Enoch. And I wrote him, and he's like, well, yeah, he says, I go to church and stuff, and but yeah, I love that kind of some of that stuff too. So he had, he's probably not an avid going to church Christian, but he has gone to church. He grew up in the church. He still attends church every once in a while. And he loves that stuff. There's another band where a lot of their stuff is the same way. And I have kind of asked them, and now I'm seeing posts on Facebook by like the guitar player from this band that are just overtly Christian. He's obviously a Christian, but the band does not market it as such. But the lyrics, at least half of every album has spiritual allusion. So and again, that's when you get into that: are they a Christian band, or are they a band of Christians? And then we get into that argument. So, but there is a lot of out there, and and you'll just find one song, a one-off song on a totally nothing album as far as that kind of lyrics. All of a sudden, you'll find this one song blatantly talking about spiritual things, blatantly talking about Jesus without using the words. And I know you bring up the people tried to push that on the Judas Priest song and things like that. So you find that on some albums where there's like a song, and you're like, where's this guy's mind when they wrote this? And it'd be neat to explore that. What were you saying with that?
So let's talk about two different bands real quick before we close shop. One band that and here's another topic, Christian rock or not to Christian rock. And what I mean by that, guys, is I made a comment in an episode, and I said that in so many words, I'm paraphrasing, that I really don't believe in the term Christian rock. I definitely, and I didn't mean that. How do I say this? I believe people, because Christian is Christ follower. I believe people are either Christ followers or they're not. And for lack of a better term, there is this music that for what that we tend to label as Christian rock. So if you're somebody, friends, that espouses Christian rock, I get it. I'm totally cool with that. I know what you mean, and I love these bands that play Christian rock. I just have a problem with the terminology in and of itself. Does that make sense, guys, whether you agree or disagree?
You gonna get a Christian pizza, Kent?
And see, I think this is the big struggle of the Christian rockers, because not only is it labeling them and putting them in a box, it's like we're more than that. But I think as Christians, we label bands like that because I'm going to listen to a band that is overtly Christian and they're a Christian rock band. So there's a big struggle and there's people, on both sides of this argument, but I catalog everything I own on Discogs, and it's always a battle on Discogs. People want to label Christian rock bands with the tag religious.
Right.
And I'm always removing that tag because the tag is the style of music. And I don't know of a religious style of music. How do you play guitar religiously? So I'm like, no, this is not a religious style of music. This is rock and roll. This is heavy metal, whatever. The thing that's funny is you cannot apply the religious tag without first choosing the category. There's subcategories. You have to choose the category non-music, and one of the sub-choices under non-music is religious. The application is, if it's not a musical problem, like say if it's a album of a sermon, and I have seen those. I see them in thrift stores all the time. Pat Robertson's sermon on vinyl, that is a non-music religious item. If you're talking music, you're going to get into gospel. That's a style of music. That's a style. You can, though it may not be, you can almost label it country. But it is a style. But anyway, so yeah, I'm all the time going in there and saying you're not allowed to choose religious because it's no such thing as religious music. It is you're trying to label the worldview of the lyrical content, and they're asking in this particular field the style of music. And I think that's the problem is in the 80s, the bands were complaining about all the time because their albums were in the Christian section of the record store, even though with the gospel music, even though they belonged next to Motley Crue. because musically
Mhm.
they did not fit you can't put them in a box. And so yeah, but I think we use those terms because we're trying to label the bands that we claim as ours. These are Christian rock bands. These are people that we know are Christians. And so I see the term. I think the bands still struggle. They don't want to be labeled with that. They want to, not all of them at least. Some don't mind it, but
I'm going to be totally transparent. I'm thinking of my brother, whom I dearly love, Tim Risto. And he has a program, Tim Talks Christian Rock, and I wholeheartedly support Tim and his program. You know, and I get it. It's nothing. I have just always, guys, from the time I was young, I have had problems with the term. The Howard Jones, if y'all remember him from the 80s, an 80s artist. And if you remember a little guy, kind of a garage artist, his name was Sting. He was in a little band called The Police. Sting and Howard Jones being Zen Buddhist. They're not labeled as Zen Buddhist rock.
exactly. And that's the thing. I'm like, and I bring that up to people on Discogs. I'm like, do you label Slayer as religious?
Right.
They have a religion there's a religion in there. Do you
Right.
label New Age bands as religious? So yeah, it's
So go
Pretty
ahead.
much anymore, especially with how readily music is available versus in the 80s and that. If I'm talking to especially like some of friends or acquaintances that I have that say aren't believers, I never use the term Christian rock anymore. I'll just say rock or hard rock or and it's so readily available. They can find it on the internet, on YouTube. So I've just kind of gotten away myself because I'm like you, Kent. I've never cared for that term. And just I feel it's almost a disservice sometimes to the bands to say that because I think people have so many pre conceptions of Christian and all of that. I just think it's almost doing a disservice to those bands. If you just say, hey, this band Guardian is rock and or whatever, to me, don't even do that. I mean, I get it too, why they're labeled that, but I think that's really done a disservice to some of the bands because of that, and they don't like it either. I mean, just like
right.
Striper, they don't consider themselves a Christian band. I mean, they're just guys that are Christians that's in a band. So
And that's the age-old argument of Christian band, Christian. And I see that I'm not as I don't as I don't go away from that term as much. I do try, like on my channel, obviously on my channel, my YouTube channel, I talk about it's not just Christian bands, it's secular. And I do try to not, I'm like, this is a great new rock band. And then I'll feel like, am I doing them? I don't want to lie to the people, but on the other hand, check these guys out. Because as soon as I say they're a Christian rock band, I may get cut off. But I'll do say these guys tend to fall more into the category of, a Christian music realm. Um, but so I'll use that term with other Christians. They are a Christian band and they're a rock band. I was surprised. I doubt she'll ever see this, but I have a coworker that has never heard Christian rock before.
Yeah.
She had, she's pushing 40. As far as I know, she's been in the church for a long time. Never, don't know who Striper is. Doesn't know any Christian bands. I sent her some Striper videos, and she was like, "Wow." She's like, "Do they all dress like that?" And they were
Mhm.
modern stuff. Anyway, I'm just surprised that in this day and age that there could be anybody in the church who's not familiar with some of these bands. Obviously, not to the caliber we are. But Striper, that should be a household name in Christian circles. But what are they listening to? I'm assuming just praise music. I don't know. Because it just seemed, I guess it's hard for me to fathom because I'm so engrossed in it. I just can't fathom anybody that doesn't know.
So Jeff, to your point, and here, okay, so here's another topic that along my walk in the early 80s, the premier band, according to my little world, the first premier band was Petra. And then, according to my humble viewpoint, here came this band called Striper, which eclipsed Petra. And then from there, in the Christian again, rock and metal realm, and I know I just say Christian rock and metal, and that's because I've never figured out a better way to put it as far as how do you say it, There was this band called DC Talk that came along, rap, rock, and soul, and here they came with their Jesus Freak album, in 1995, and they were the bomb. And then here came Skillet, a few years later, and they began to, anyway, you get the idea. It amazes me how from Striper to DC Talk in the 90s crowd, and Striper wasn't that far removed. In fact, Against the Law was 1990. But there were so many people by 95 in the church crowd who had no idea who Striper was. And just a year or two ago, maybe 3 years ago, I was in a conversation with somebody and he was talking about Toby Mac. And I said, well, he was the
DC Talk, yeah.
The main writer and main guy really behind DC Talk. And he goes, he was in DC Talk, and it amazes me how people don't, and then there are so many people you ask them and they have no idea who DC Talk is, much less Striper.
And it's,
I'm like, DC Talk.
It's a different era, yeah.
So it perplexes me because, see, people don't say that about AC/DC, or they don't say that about Guns N' Roses, or they don't say that about, I don't know, name another.
Aerosmith.
Think of a secular band who's done that. So what band can we think of that is an off branch of another band that they probably wouldn't know about? I mean, like probably somebody like, I don't know, somebody that's went solo, maybe somebody's not familiar that they were.
What about the band that sang Fall to Pete, Velvet Revolver? They were kind of an offshoot of Guns N' Roses. And
they were a mixture of Guns N' Roses and
Stone Temple Pilots.
Soggy Toilet Paper. I mean, Stone Temple Pilots, yeah, STP. Yeah.
Well,
so I mean, but again, they didn't go on to become hugely popular. People might think, oh, you mean this guy was in a band before?
Yeah.
But bands like that where they've done something, and it's like, oh, I didn't know he was in that other band 20 years ago. Yeah. It happens, and I guess it probably does happen in the mainstream. I don't know. Probably back in the day, I'm thinking, my mind, of course, I'm old school. Back in the day, people probably knew who Peter Gabriel was, but they probably didn't know he was in Genesis. Because there's two totally different worlds, because Genesis went on to have a different style and Peter Gabriel. So I'm sure it happens out there, and it's just because we're so old and we have so much memories that we know all of this.
So two quick things, and we'll close it out, guys, by the half-hour mark coming up here. So one band, we've been talking about bands that don't necessarily. I always appreciate an album that has allusion and deep thought, Jeff and Rex, as we were talking about. It's always nice to kind of come full circle, though, and hear at least one song that just kind of puts you before the King of Kings, if you will. One such band to me that always had a lot of depth to their music, even back in the day, was Barren Cross. So many socio-political songs in a good way, just to make you think. I don't know that Barren Cross, you guys tell me, has Barren Cross ever put out a bad album?
No.
You see, along the same lines, Sacred Warrior.
Yep.
First album was, in my opinion, blatantly Christian. Everyone after that was social issues. And I have to say, in my judgmental teen years or early 20s, I hated that. I'm like, why are they not singing about Christ? Now I look back, same with Barren Cross when they started doing all that. But now I look back and they were miles above my mental capabilities back then. And now I see it. But back then it was like, if they're not talking about Jesus and if they're not smiling on their album, I was a pain in the butt. But yeah, all the bands dabbled with that stuff. And yeah, I agree. It's, that's great stuff. So
quick game, Jeff and Rex. This is called Druthers, okay? There's no right or wrong. It's Druthers, okay? Would you rather have this or this? So, Jeff, we'll start with you. Atomic Arena or State of Control? What's your druther? Would you rather have, if you could have one in your collection but not the other, which one are you going to pick and why?
Probably, that is tough.
Atomic Control?
Atomic Control.
State
Well,
of
to me, so Atomic Arena is it resonates with me. Just because when it came out, it just in comparison to the first album, it was so different and production, it blew me away and it just is ingrained in me. State of Control is a step above. It's the production, the songs are much more, they just, there's so much intensity there on that stage.
the stage of
Um,
intensity.
yeah. So many great songs. It'd be really tough, but I think because nostalgia is telling me is telling me Atomic Arena only because when it came out, it blew me away. But State of Control came out, it was like not saying it was more the same. It was good, and it's in some cases maybe even slightly better. Wow, that is tough. Some favorite songs on both of them, but just the raw Atomic Arena, I guess to me, just hits me differently.
Sure.
And I'm gonna agree with you, Jeff. And there's a lot of sentimental stuff with that too. I was in college at the time, and me and my best friend Ron, we got the cassette of it, when it came out, and we were just like you, blown away by just the increased, better production from Rock for the King, and like we just played and played and played that tape, and like we were just like, okay, they're gonna hit the big time just like Striper, they're on the same label, now this is if anyone who loves heavy metal and rock is gonna love this album. And yeah, I'm gonna give it to Atomic Arena also, just because I guess.
Yeah, and the thing that prior to Atomic Arena, we got California Metal, where we had a Deadlock on there, which
Mhm.
was a different version. And we had so that was just like we ate that up. It was like, oh, and then when it came out on the album, it just tied. And that California Metal album to me has just so many highlights on it
Mhm.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
it ties to that the nostalgia of that. And then when the album came out, it was slightly different, and you had more of the same, and it was like, yeah, it was great.
I don't know if there's a better, forgive me, I don't know, but for a compilation album, that California Metal album is such a classic in its own
Yeah,
right to
yeah.
be a compilation
A
album.
lot of those Regency albums that had band like the Underground Metal, the
Yeah.
California Metal, the East Coast Metal, there are some real gems that we never saw the light of day as far as the band. But there, so to me, I love those because it brought to us a lot of great songs by bands that we never heard from after that. So I love them.
Last question before the half hour mark when we close out, guys. The new Petra single, Deliver Us, I believe it's called. Forgive me if I'm not getting it quite right. I've checked it out online a couple times. Um, what are your general thoughts and what is your prediction, if we can say that? How do you think the new album's going to come out as a whole with regard to sound style?
I'm going to admit from the beginning that I've only heard a piece of the song. So I'm going to let Rex handle this because he's probably listened to it ad nauseum every day.
Well, I don't know that I would say ad nauseum, Jeff. Um, I guess I'm looking for the rocking Petra, the on fire, album or whatever type of music, or even Jekyll and Hyde. And I know why they released it, and I get that, and it's fairly ballady, I guess I'm going to say. I mean, John's voice sounds great. I guess overall my expectations, I was expecting like I said, the rock and Petra. And so like we're not getting that with that song. I guess I'm really hoping that we get some, rocking tunes on the rest of the album whenever it's released. It's okay. I wasn't like blown away by the song, I guess is what I'm gonna say. And I hope that we get some rocking songs on the rest of the album.
And see, it's because I've heard people saying similar things that I haven't been over anxious to go out there and sit down and because I've heard mixed reviews. But you look at John's work with like the Sinners and Saints albums, he can still rock. So
Mhm. Oh yeah.
I would think that Petra, that's kind of the Petra way to, that hopefully it's not gonna. Now I don't know, Jekyll and Hyde. That is so different than everything. I remember when we first got that album, listened to it in the car. My son, who probably, I don't know what year that was, but my son was probably in his early teens, if that. We're listening to it on the way to church. He goes, "This isn't Christian music," because it was so much heavier. But I don't know why I was saying that, because we listened to all kinds of metal. But he just thought. But anyway, it's so different. But yeah, I'm not sure what they would do with that kind of style. But
I mean,
yeah,
I'm looking for like a hit you where you live, just I'm hoping that we get some stuff musically like that.
yeah.
Definitely, on this new album. I have no idea when it's going to be released. I'm assuming probably next year, maybe. I don't know.
I mean,
Well,
I think we're
has
in
it fully been?
November, October. Say what,
Is it
Jeff?
really? Is it a full album for sure? Or is this just a band?
Yeah, yeah, there's a full album. Yep, yep.
so here's a question that I noted about that. It was a fan-made video, okay? And Petra has gone on to say, if you can make one better, knock yourself out and send it to us. Here's my question. So it was a fan-made video. So did a fan choose the song and make a video and give it to Petra and them saying, hey,
Put it out.
this is cool enough, we're going to put it out? If that's the case, it could have been the fans' choice that chose that song. Because do you guys remember seeing any kind of a contest to make a fan made video for Petra?
It was
So I know,
probably somebody's nephew in the band that knew the band. I can do that video for you. But the question is, did he have multiple songs to choose from?
there
Or is
you
that
go.
the first single?
Yes, Jeff, that was the next step. It's like, okay, but who was this fan and where did he have a choice? So anywho, that's that. So guys, and Rex, I know you've been multiple times, and Jeff, I know that you've been before, and it's 14 hours away from me. I applaud Immortal Fest. I think it's a great thing, and especially since Cornerstone has come and gone, many years of that festival, wonderful festival, and others. Guys, do you feel that? What are your thoughts about Immortal Fest? Do you feel that? I know there's been some questions. Some think that maybe it should just be once a year and maybe to try to strive to have a rotation of artists each year. Do you feel you guys have been? Do you feel that that's a good option, or do you feel like things are smooth the way they are?
Rex probably doesn't care because he lives down the street from Immortal Fest. But for those of us who have to travel, I admit I was saddened that it was 2 weekends because some of my favorite bands were on both weeks and I only got to see half. It was a plane trip for me. I don't know how many hours it would have been. Probably same as probably a good 10 or 11 too. Um, from that standpoint. The other thing that I was a little surprised by when I went into it, I did not know anything about it. It wasn't until I had already booked my everything that I finally looked at the itinerary and realized it's not all day. I was thinking I was walking into a thing that was going to be Friday night and then 10 o'clock Saturday morning until 10 o'clock Saturday night, which means if they had done that, maybe it would have been overkill, but it would have meant you probably could have put 2 weekends into one, got a lot more bands. I'm seeing a lot of the chats online. I'm in the Immortal Fest groups because I really think that they pulled me into those groups because they think I'm the Jeff McCormick from Reign of Glory, but I'm not going to tell them I'm not. But they it seems like the attendance was down this year, and that saddens me. I know Dale Thompson had some words to say about the response when they were there, because and it's sad because I wish these things were huge, but I understand it's a niche that maybe is not as big and it can, but I don't know the guy who's putting it on, is he made of money? Can he continue doing it or is he really going to be suffering? I hear he loses money every year. I don't know what that means. They're talking about the questionable future of Immortal Fest. In my opinion, yeah, a one weekend thing m might draw more people. I don't know. Because some people went to one and not the other. And maybe if there's only one, you'd have twice as many people. I don't know how many people went to both. weed them out, and then how many people were left over that only went to one or the other? Um, and
Well, Jeff, I and then Jody started going with me, my wife. I went to at least one of them every year except for this year in 2025. And I'm just going to be quite honest. We didn't go mostly because of the burnout factor, and I also agree. I think it should just be one weekend, and I just I think, I love living in Ohio. I think, if they're wanting bigger crowds, I love this whole idea, but I saw some messages and talking, and I think, if you're wanting to get bigger, like a place like Nashville might be a better location to maybe try to get more people to come. I don't know if that's the answer or not, but I do think just one weekend. And I mean, as much as I love some of these bands, I mean, some of those bands I've seen 4 times now. I think, if you can get either different bands, or I would still like to keep it like in that OG era. And I know there's just some bands that are not never going to get back together. But I just think definitely having it one weekend would really help everyone, because even for like me and Jody living, under 3 hours away, there's still a lot of cost involved for hotel and that to try to go to both weekends. I just think most people cannot afford to do that realistically, and so they're picking and choosing. And if you're really wanting to have a just a huge thing, I think you need to go back to just having one festival a year.
I think location does, because it's in the, I mean, it's, you have to fly in to the airport that's 2 hours away. It's a lot. Not that people, we do it because we love it. And I wonder, you brought up the whole OG idea. Is that good or bad? I mean, because it's attracting us. Are we a dying breed? Would they benefit? Now, Disciple, they're fairly, but even Disciple is 20 plus years old.
Yeah.
Would there benefit in attendance if they had a couple sprinkled in modern bands? And I think immediately of like Demon Hunter. They're 20 years old. They're 23 years old.
Pillar,
Who
Demon Hunter, Disciple.
any yeah so and then would that turn off those of us who don't want to hear extreme metal? This has been a discussion even on the Heavens Metal group of what could make it better, more diversity, or is that going to hurt? You know, I love going because every one of the bands is like you said, it's an OG, it's a classic band, with the exception of a couple bands that sound that way. Reign of Glory, Fear Not is classic but modern, and so yeah, it's tough.
Well,
Obviously,
and Jeff, your idea about start earlier in the morning, have these newer bands, and if you're trying to market it as an OG thing, and then have the other bands that we love, later on, and have these other newer, quote, newer bands earlier if you can, or maybe have a Disciple, later on, because they're well known in that. I don't know.
they closed the night out, and it was, I'd never seen them live, and I was impressed. But yeah, I mean, you bring in different diverse music styles, you're going to have a more diverse crowd, but you're also going to have people that are probably bored or walking out during that show. I don't want to see, impending doom or something, because I'm not into that. So they're going to leave. Um, I
Rex,
think I'd probably stick around a lot of that, but it's, I don't know. There's so many ifs, so many what ifs. I loved it. I loved the idea that I was able to meet people in these bands that I have online communicated with for many years. Just to look in Richard Lynch's eyes when he saw me from across the room, Jeff, and he ran right over. Mike Lee, he's like, Jeff, get over here. And I'm like, these are guys that I've done business with, but never met. So that Now, I admit I was really saddened that I did not get to meet the West Coast Jeff McCormack, um, because I was talking to Mike Lee. He texted me. He said, "Get over here. I've gotten everybody's left the booth. Come talk to me." I'm over talking to him. They came down, and I'm like, and then they were gone. I thought that was great, and having the time to do that. But yeah, I mean, we're the old crowd that wants that. I just don't. I feel bad that they're losing money. I feel bad that the turnout's not as good because, in my opinion, these things should be sold out.
So
You know?
the turnout's the question, and Rex, I'd like to ask you because you mentioned burnout. When you say burnout, what's the context? Is it because as much as you love certain bands, you have seen them three, four times now? Or what's the burnout factor for you?
Well, and I'm going
Mhm.
to be, not that I'm not, I'm going to be quite honest. The lineup too,
About time.
really, the lineup this year, it was such a mixture of old and new. The other prior Immortal Fest, they were fairly separated. Like the first one was newer bands like Reign of Glory and One Bad Pig, and I can't remember. And then that second one was what I would call the OG. This year, it was such a conglomeration. We were already a little bit on the fence if we were going to go just because it takes up all of your Labor Day weekend, and that's the one we normally go to. And then when we saw the lineup, it was just like, yeah, that was just like, yeah, we can afford not to go this year, I think. And yeah, the lineup was such a hodgepodge for us too that I mean, Jody Loves Worldview. We would have loved to seen them again, but yeah, the lineup too was such a mishmash.
Which I didn't mind that diversity. I didn't have any issue with that at all. I think part of what I would have liked to have had was a little more breathing room. It seems like the bands, and it's good that they can do this, but there wasn't that fellowship time where you could go meet the band before the next band was blaring. Yeah, you're not there for that. Maybe the burnout could be too many bands too much in one day. Space them out and have more bands spaced out. Again, there's not a solid answer. I like the diversity. I had not seen any of these bands before. Um, so I was, but yeah, every year I know people who have went to, they've had some bands there multiple times. Maybe try to veer away from that to where it's, you know,
Well,
but
and I'm not as far as bands go, I'm not big on bands being brands, okay? But I have no problem with a fest, a music fest being a brand. So honestly, it might be cool if Immortal Fest is a brand. It's out of Ohio. If they have Immortal Fest 2 in Nashville,
but they
it
did
could
that,
be
and they did that in Cornerstone for a bit. They had Cornerstone, North Carolina,
okay.
and Cornerstone, I think Florida,
Mhm.
maybe a year. They were trying.
And
So
that way, and it could be from the same constituents because what I mean by constituents is Steve Barhorst and company who have the brand or however that works. He puts it on. But if you have it in a different location, more centralized, that can bring a whole lot of people, potentially me, who simply can't travel 14 hours one way on my budget, and
yeah.
other people can come and it'll be the first time and the second time and third time for them in this location.
Well, then you basically taken that brand and made it a touring entity, which I think puts a lot of burden on people like Steve, not only funding it, but all the legwork to schedule it in
Mhm.
multiple places. It'd be nice if there were a handful of promoters who do these kind of concerts
Right.
said, let's pull our resources together, and
Yes.
we'll all call ourselves Immortal Fest.
Mhm.
Rather than doing everything individually, let's pull it under one umbrella. Let's
Yes.
pool our resources. Let's pool our funds together, and let's
Yes.
see if we can't put together a connected series of shows and then we can create this similar to what Cornerstone did. But I don't know, was Cornerstone, did every one of those take place with the same people? Or hey, we got some guys in Florida that want to put on a show. Let's work with them. You know, Christian promotion is, I mean, getting these Christian bands is, you don't see many bands touring. It's really hard. So I don't know how many big companies out there or how many other Steves there are that can. And I'm sure Immortal Fest is probably in his hometown, in his building that he probably doesn't pay, you know, has some connection with. So there's probably a lot of things there that make it easy for him to do there
Sure.
that probably would not be as easy to replicate in a Nashville. Though it'd be great if they could find somebody to help get on board with resources, then yeah. And you know, but I understand the difficulty. It can be
Yeah,
tough.
sure. Easier said than done, but you never
We
know
would,
until
yeah,
you try.
we would love to see it, but I can see why it'd be difficult. Yeah.
Anyway, another question of curiosity. Guys, this has been great. Just running the gamut. Always kind of wanted to do this, and Rex and I have always wanted to put our theory to the test, Jeff, because, and Jeff, you and I even, you know, on occasion when we've talked on the phones, and me and Rex do about every other day, but we'll get into a little conversation, and this conversation will begat this conversation, and so on. Before you know it, an hour and a half has passed, just I guess almost like today.
And Kent's like, man, we should have recorded that, Rex.
And that's why I feel bad sometimes because honestly, I don't, there's nobody like you all I don't have any friends
Yeah.
We're
like
your
you
friends,
all.
Jeff.
Like you all. I'll add that qualitative. So, I mean, so I don't have a lot of people that I talk to about this music. Um, So when I get on here or on the phone, it becomes a ramble fest because it's just like you let out. The floodgates open. And then
Yes.
I feel like I want to tell every story about every song that I've dealt with. And I feel like I sometimes need to just restrain. So having one of these free for alls like this is great because it's kind of like therapy. You're kind of like letting it out. You're
Yeah.
able to really talk. And sometimes I don't want to take up that time on our shows with guests because I'm like, let me tell you a story about how that song influenced me. It becomes the Jeff Ramble show. So anyway, I
So,
appreciate it.
what did I say earlier we should deep dive on, guys? I forgot.
Bands that have
Oh,
the one that
allusion.
allusion, yeah,
Illusion, yeah.
Mainstream
secular.
bands that have biblical principles into a song or something. You know, you get it. So, and another thing we could talk about next time, another topic. I know we talked about maybe multiple bands that use the same lead singer, and could that potentially be hurtful, not to all those bands because it's the same voice, but even to that singer's main band that they sing for, because oversaturation is the point. I'm also thinking of maybe a production company from back in the day that kind of tend to bring the same sound to this band, to this band, to this band. And after a while, all these bands kind of have. So that's another topic we can dive into
And
sometime.
I know, I definitely know who you're talking about because we already mentioned them. But in my opinion, you see that mark, and I thought this is going to be top notch. But on the other hand, I also know this is going to have this done to it.
Yeah,
Yes.
That
that sound.
it's
Yeah.
These
going to
drums
have
will sound this way, and these
the
backing vocals will
the
sound this
backing
way.
vocals are going to be there. And while you listen to the original, you're like, I really love the original. I can't say that in all cases the what they did to him was bad. So, but yeah, that would be cool too.
Well, guys, thank you for blessing today, making the fellowship great today. And we're going to close out with some scripture closeout in Rex and Jeff, as you know, I'm going to check something after we close out, so don't leave just quite yet. But friends out there, you know, talking about, well, just Christian rock in general and running the gamut. I can remember back in the day, boy, you know, if I had a dime for every time being lambasted, I think that's the word, lambasted, for listening to Christian rock and you know, they look this way, they sound this way, and all that, and yada yada. Anyway, 1 Samuel 16:17. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And, you know, may we have, I guess to quote a little Daniel band, may we have a right heart before the Lord. That's who we need to be concerned with, is our relationship with the Lord. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And I'm thankful that he does. 1 Samuel 16:17. Jeff and Rex, great fellowship today, and I appreciate you, brothers. Let's wave goodbye to our friends. Everybody hang out for one more moment. Take care, everybody.
Bye.